Today we will cover the applied anatomy of the upper limb as prescribed by the Medical Council of India competence based curriculum. First, we'll study the anatomical basis of avascular necrosis of scaphoid. The major blood supply to the scaphoid is via the radial artery. 70 to 80% of the intraosseous vascularity and 100% of the proximal pole is supplied by branches of the radial artery entering through the dorsal ridge at the distal pole of the scaphoid and going proximally through the waist into the proximal pole. They can't reach the proximal pole in fractures through the waist of scaphoid. More proximal the fracture, more is the damage to vascularity, and greater are the chances of avascular necrosis of the proximal pole. The avascular pole will fail to unite and create osteoarthritis. 20 to 30% of the bone in the region of the distal tuberosity receives its blood supply from branches of the volar radial artery. Thus, the volar operative approach to the scaphoid would be least traumatic to the proximal pole's blood supply. Then, fracture of the scaphoid is clinically recognized by tenderness in the snuff box. This is more reliable initially than X-ray wrist, AP, lateral and oblique because the fracture takes 2 weeks to be radiologically visible by bone absorption. In fresh case, ultrasound is therefore more reliable. The fracture is treated by scaphoid cast for 10 to 12 weeks to protect vascularity and prevent micromovement. An AO or headless screw to allow it to sink under the articular surface with a differential 0.3 millimeter pitch of the threads distally and 0.1 millimeter pitch of the threads proximally. When passed across and perpendicular to the fracture site, can cause compression due to differential movement of the two fragments. The proximal fragment will move less and the distal fragment will move more, therefore, there will be compression. The dorsal carpal branch based bone graft across the fracture may revascularize the proximal pole and may promote union. Now you notice that the volar artery which is entering distally is supplying only 20 to 30% and only in the distal pole. The dorsal artery, which is a branch of the dorsal carpal branch of the radial, is entering from the distal pole and going through the waist right into the proximal pole. So when the proximal pole becomes osteoarthritic, then it has to be managed by excision of the proximal pole and replacement by a silastic implant. Or you may have to do a radial styloidectomy, which is far more disabling. So, first of all, we learn the formation of the brachial plexus. If you state as I state, then you will remember the formation by heart. The brachial plexus is formed by 5, 6, 7, 8, 1 roots. 5, 6 gives upper trunk, 7 middle trunk, and 8, 1 lower trunk. The trunks divide into the anterior and posterior divisions. The anterior division of the upper and middle trunk form the lateral cord, lower trunk the medial cord, and posterior divisions of all trunks form the posterior cord. Lateral cord continues as musculocutaneous nerve, medial cord as ulnar, and posterior cord as radial. Median arises from both the medial and the lateral cords. If you want to remember the branches, first the roots: 3, 4, 5 phrenic, 5, 6, 7 nerve to serratus anterior, and 5 nerve to rhomboids. All roots give branches to scalene muscles and rami communicants to the sympathetic ganglion. The upper trunk gives suprascapular nerve, which supply the supraspinatus and infraspinatus, and nerve to subclavius. The cords: lateral and medial pectoral from the lateral and medial cords, medial cutaneous nerve of arm and forearm additionally from the medial cord, and upper lower subscapular axillary from the posterior cord, and also the nerve to latissimus dorsi. Now all these nerves, lateral medial pectoral, medial cutaneous nerve of arm and forearm, upper lower subscapular, thoracodorsal and axillary from the posterior cord, are in addition to the main four nerves: musculocutaneous, lateral, ulnar nerve, medial, radial nerve posterior, and median nerve anterior to the axillary artery. Now we look at the Erb's point and the Klumpke's point. The 5, 6 or upper trunk is the Erb's point. It has 6 nerves. The 5, 6 roots, the anterior posterior divisions, and suprascapular nerve and nerve to subclavius. It is pulled during delivery in breech presentation or forceps delivery when the baby's head is laterally bent to the opposite direction, in the opposite side of the paralysis. The upper trunk paralysis presents as policeman tip taking position. If you visualize this position, you will find that shoulder abductors are paralyzed, elbow flexors are paralyzed, forearm supinators are paralyzed, and wrist dorsiflexors are paralyzed. So policeman tip taking position is the paralyzed position with Erb's paralysis. If you immobilize in policeman's top position, these movements are totally reversed, and this prevents contracture. In case of residual paralysis, shoulder abductors are restored by trapezius to deltoid transfer. Elbow flexors are restored by pectoralis minor to biceps brachii transfer, and wrist dorsiflexors are restored by pronator teres to extensor carpi radialis longus transfer. The lower trunk is the Klumpke's point. It has root value of 8,1. It is damaged by hyperabduction or cervical rib or scalenus anticus syndrome. It supplies hand muscles, and the result is that 1, 2, 3, 4 lumbricals are paralyzed, and they present as all 4 claw hand. The ulnar claw hand is of the medial 2 fingers only. Here it is all 4 claw hand. Now lumbricals flex the MP joint and extend the PIP and DIP joint through the extensor expansion. They are restored by flexor digitorum superficialis tendon of the middle or the ring finger, which is divided into 4 slips, and then these slips are passed through the lumbrical canal and stitched onto the extensor expansion under tension, with MP joints flexed and PIP and DIP extended, which is called as the intrinsic plus position. Then we look at what causes enlargement of axillary nodes. Basically, it is carcinoma of the breast. Also, any infection in the upper extremity can also cause their enlargement. So, what are the axillary lymph nodes? Axilla has a pectoralis major and minor anteriorly, subscapularis posteriorly and serratus anterior medially. Therefore, the lymph nodes can be anterior, posterior, medial, lateral, and central. Now, you notice the cephalic vein on the superior border of the pectoralis major, lying between it and the deltoid muscle, which pierces the clavipectoral fascia, connecting the clavicle to the pectoralis minor to merge into the axillary vein. With it is also a lymphatic from the axillary tail of Spence of breast, which carries secondaries from breast cancer into the axillary lymph nodes, and then through the cervicoaxillary canal behind the clavicle into the supraclavicular lymph nodes. Clavipectoral fascia is pierced by cephalic vein, thoracoacromial artery, lateral pectoral nerve, and lymphatics from the breast from its axillary tail of Spence. Now, breast drains into the axillary lymph nodes through its axillary tail of Spence, and then the right breast into the liver through its falciform peritoneal fold, which connects the liver to the rectus sheath. This is called as the pathway of Geroda. Infection or malignancy in the upper limbs can also cause enlarged lymph nodes in the axilla. Besides, any cause of generalized lymphadenopathy should also be looked for, like lymphoma or leukemia. Axillary lymph nodes are palpated with arms slightly abducted, the forearm of the patient resting comfortably on the examiner's arm, so that the suspensory fascia of the axilla, extending from its anterior to posterior fold, stays relaxed while you palpate the lymph nodes. Now, this is the breast lying on the surface of pectoralis major, and we have cut a section through it. So you notice the lobules of the breast, and between them and the skin, between the lobule and the skin, is the subcuticular lymphatics, which is going towards the areola centripetally and into the nipple. These subcuticular lymphatics are connected to deep lymphatics between the breast and the pectoralis major, which are going centrifugally. And this connection is through the ligament of Astley-Cooper, which actually divides the lobules. So in cancer of the breast, the ligament of Astley-Cooper contracts, pulling the nipple towards the cancer and causing indrawing of the nipple. This applied importance is also asked with this lymphatic drainage. Then we go on to the applied anatomy of the shoulder joint. First, understand that the upper limb movement around the shoulder are because of the scapula moving on the thorax, which is scapulothoracic joint. These movements occur on the sternoclavicular joint, bony joint on which the scapula moves over the thorax is sternoclavicular joint. Secondly, the movements may occur at the glenohumeral joint, the glenoid of the scapula articulating with the head of the humerus. Notice that the serratus anterior will pull the scapula forward on the chest wall. This is protraction. And rhomboids and middle fibers of the trapezius will pull it back, which is retraction. Upper fibers of the trapezius pulling the spine of the scapula, the acromion, and the lateral part of the clavicle up. And the lower fibers of the trapezius inserted to medial to the deltoid tubercle on the spine of the scapula, pulling the medial part of the spine of scapula down, along with the serratus anterior pulling the inferior angle laterally and up, will externally rotate the scapula. The pectoralis minor pulling the coracoid down will derotate it. Levator scapulae elevates, and trapezius lower fibers and pectoralis minor depress the scapula on the chest wall. Serratus anterior paralysis is recognized by winging of the scapula when you ask the patient to push the wall. And this movement basically needs protraction, which is absent in paralysis of serratus anterior, and thus there is winging of the scapula. On the glenohumeral joint, it's a ball and socket joint. So 6 movements on 3 axes: abduction, adduction, flexion, extension, external, internal rotation axis. Supraspinatus abducts first 15 degrees and deltoid up to 90 degrees. Muscles of anterior and posterior axillary fold and coracobrachialis adduct the humerus in relation to the trunk. Subscapularis inserted anteriorly internally rotates, and the sit structures, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor, inserted on the greater tuberosity, externally rotated. Muscles inserted on the bicipital groove, which is the lady between 2 majors, the latissimus dorsi between pectoralis major and teres major, would internally rotate. One major, that means pectoralis major, and anterior fibers of the deltoid will flex the arm, and the latissimus dorsi and the posterior part of the deltoid, posterior fibers of the deltoid, will extend the shoulder or the arm. The applied is the deltoid doesn't abduct in the first 15 degrees because its line of pull is too near the axis of abduction, passing through the head of the humerus. So it will lift the head but not abduct it. Scapula descends in development. Failure to descend leads to high shoulder, which is called a Sprengel's shoulder. Bilateral high shoulder with short neck is Klippel-Feil syndrome. Undescended scapula may be associated or held high by a ossified levator scapulae, which is referred to as omovertebral bar. Now, the common pathologies around the shoulder are dislocated sternoclavicular joint, fracture clavicle, dislocated acromioclavicular joint, dislocated shoulder, recurrent dislocation of the shoulder, painful arch syndrome, periarthritis of the shoulder, and in the upper end of the humerus, you have bicipital tendinitis and fracture of the proximal humerus. Let us review the questions of anatomy around these problems. Dislocated sternoclavicular joint. It dislocates by failure or tear of sternoclavicular meniscus, which holds the medial end of the clavicle down in relation to the sternum. Fracture clavicle. It occurs at the junction of the lateral third and medial two third because it is the junction of the flat and triangular portion of the bone, the cancellous and cortical portion of the bone, the junction of the two ossific nuclei, the junction of the weight bearing and the non-weight bearing portion of the bone, the junction of the concave forward and convex forward part of the clavicle. When there is a fracture, the distal fragment is displaced forward, downwards, and medially, which is pulled by the anterior axillary fold muscles, which is the pectoralis major. This will reduce by a figure of 8 bandage. It will unite in 4 weeks but may malunite. If the two ossific nuclei in both clavicles and cranial sutures fail to fuse during development, the condition is called as craniocleidodysostosis. Here the person can meet his shoulders in front of the chest. Then we go on to a dislocated acromioclavicular joint. It will dislocate if the coracoclavicular ligament holding the lateral end of the clavicle down in relation to the scapula ruptures. This ligament needs repair for a stable reduction. Then we talk of the dislocated shoulder. The head of the humerus commonly dislocates anterior to the glenoid, but sometimes posterior to it. Rarely it remains infraglenoid in the quadrangular space when the arm is abducted. The deformity is called as luxatio erecta. Anterior dislocation presents with pain, swelling, deformity, and loss of function. On examination, the arm is abducted and externally rotated, and the following 4 physical signs help the diagnosis. One is the Hamilton ruler test. That means your ability to touch the acromion and the lateral epicondyle with the same ruler, because the deltoid bulge has disappeared, because the greater tuberosity has moved medially. The second is inability to touch the opposite shoulder, because adduction, internal rotation needed for this function are unavailable and painful. This is called as the Dugas test. The third is that the anterior axillary fold is lowered, and therefore the axilla is deep, which is the Bryant's, and the circumference of the axilla is increased, which is the Callaway's test. Finally, the head of the humerus may be felt in the subcoracoid area and confirmed by showing transmitted movements. Any crepitus during the examination indicates associated fracture of the proximal humerus, and it is wise to get an X-ray done before you start manipulating it. Otherwise, you would be blamed for having produced the fracture. Reduction is by traction counter traction under general anesthesia to disimpact and get muscle relaxation. Gentle external rotation to avoid fracturing the osteoporous surgical neck of humerus, especially in postmenopausal females. Adduction till the elbow lies in front of the chest, and internal rotation so that with the flexed elbow the hand reaches the opposite shoulder. The Dugas test becomes negative, and you have confirmed reduction of the anterior dislocation of shoulder. This maneuver is called as the Cocker's method of reduction. The axillary nerve passes through the quadrangular space below the head of the humerus and may be damaged. In case of damage, the deltoid and the teres minor will be paralyzed, and there will be anesthesia in the subacromial regiment patch area. In the recurrent dislocation shoulder, the shoulder will keep on dislocating again and again, because the anterior structures, the capsule, the glenohumeral ligament, the subscapularis, are stretched or damaged, or the glenoid labrum is avulsed from the anterior margin of the glenoid. Repair is by double breasting of subscapularis, called the Putty-Platt operation, reattaching the glenoid labrum to the anterior margin of glenoid, which is called as the Benkart's operation. Sometimes there is depressed fracture of the posterior superior part of the head of the humerus. This is called as the Hill-Sachs lesion. So imagine that there is external rotation of the head, and this depressed portion comes to lie in contact with the anterior margin of the glenoid. And therefore, since it is depressed, the glenoid margin will be unable to prevent it from slipping medially and forward. This Hill-Sachs lesion is diagnosed by the X-ray AP shoulder with 60 degrees internally rotated shoulder. It is treated by attaching the osteotomized coracoid on the anterior margin of the glenoid to act as bone block, to block the head from slipping anterior and medial. This operation is called as the Latter-Jet operation. The painful arc syndrome. As the arm is abducted, the structures between the greater tuberosity and the acromion process, namely the subacromial bursa in bursitis, or supraspinatus tendon in case of tendinitis, calcification or rupture, can be compressed and be painful between 30 to 70 degree abduction range. This painful arc syndrome, treatable by steroid injection to decrease swelling and inflammation, or shaving of the undersurface of the acromion to widen the subacromial space is uh, a common problem. The supraspinatus rupture or paralysis leads to loss of 15 degree of abduction. First 15 degree of abduction, when the scapula must rotate first before the deltoid can take over. This is called as the reversal of the scapulohumeral rhythm. In the periarthritis shoulder, there is inflammation, spasm, and fibrosis of the subscapularis and other muscles of the rotator cuff, like the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor. This presents as painful limitation of abduction, external and internal rotation. The hand cannot reach the interscapular region. Diabetes predisposes to this. Best treatment is exercise to restore abduction and circumduction. The long head of the biceps, along with its synovial sheath, an ascending branch of the anterior circumflex humeral artery, lies in the bicipital groove, plastered to it by the transverse bicipital ligament, which converts the groove into a fibroosseous tunnel. Any injury or inflammation causing edema in these structures causes pain and tenderness, which is aggravated on flexing and supinating the elbow, which is the action of the biceps brachii. Treatment is physiotherapy, steroid injection, or surgical decompression. Fracture of the proximal humerus has been divided into 4 parts: anatomical and surgical necks, and the greater and lesser tuberosities. Closed reduction and retention or open retention can be done depending on displacement and reducibility of the fracture. But fractures of the anatomic neck lead to avascular necrosis of the head, as the entire supply of the head of the humerus is intraosseous. The head has to be replaced by a socket and glenoid by a ball to keep the axis of abduction away from the line of pull of deltoid, so that this is to allow the necessary lever arm to abduct the shoulder. You must remember that the axis always passes through the ball, and therefore the ball should be medial and down. That means the ball should be with the glenoid. Thus, in this prosthesis, the ball is replaced by the socket and the socket by the ball. Then we see the axillary nerve, which arises from the posterior cord, passes through the quadrangular space, bounded superiorly by the lax part of capsule, sandwiched between the subscapularis in front and teres minor behind, inferiorly by teres major, medially by the long head of triceps, and surgical neck of humerus laterally. It winds round the humerus under the deltoid muscle. Injection into the deltoid should never be below the greater tuberosity, otherwise they can damage the nerve. In case the nerve is damaged, the teres minor and deltoid will be paralyzed, and there would be subacromial regiment batch area anesthesia. Also note that the nerve to teres minor has a pseudoganglion. Then anatomical basis of the Saturday night paralysis. Notice that the branches of the posterior cord are upper and lower subscapular, nerve to latissimus dorsi, and radial, besides the axillary nerve. The radial nerve passes through the lateral triangular space to lie in the radial groove, which is covered only by the lateral head of the triceps. In drunk stage on a Saturday night or against the edge of the OT table with patient under general anesthesia, the radial nerve in the radial groove undergoes prolonged compression, leading to temporary paralysis called as neurapraxia. This is called the Saturday night paralysis. It leads to wrist drop, thumb drop, and finger drop. Wrist drop is due to extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis, and extensor carpi ulnaris paralysis. Finger drop is due to extensor digitorum longus, extensor digiti minimi, and extensor indicis paralysis. And the thumb drop is due to abductor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis longus, and extensor pollicis brevis paralysis. Now, this is the anatomical basis of veiny puncture in the cubital fossa. Notice that the biceps brachii inserted into the radial tuberosity sends an aponeurosis to the deep fascia over which the cubital vein lies. At this point, it cannot be pushed back and is therefore easy to puncture. Also notice that the cephalic vein supported by the brachioradialis is also stable and unlikely to slip. Therefore, 1. You make the veins prominent or engorged by tying a tourniquet proximally and clenching the fist again and again to promote venous return. 2. Clean the skin by aseptic. 3. Keep the elbow in complete extension so that the base bicipital aponeurosis of brachioradialis firmly supports the vein and doesn't allow it to get depressed or slip sideways. 4. Pierce proximal to the site of the venipuncture with the needle bevel away from the vein, exactly parallel, and go exactly parallel and on top of the vein so that it does not slip sideways. At the site of the puncture, dip the needle point into the vein and advance it. Confirm that you are inside the vein by drawing blood. So notice the direction of the bevel and see that the green line represents a tight biceps aponeurosis of brachioradialis, which does not allow posterior slippage of the vein. Now here we tell you the anatomical basis of the carpal tunnel syndrome. You notice the median nerve as it crosses the pronator quadratus labeled PQ. It gives a palmar carpal branch which passes superficial to the carpal ligament and supplies the skin over the thenar eminence. The nerve then passes under the carpal ligament, which is extending from the piscio-hamate ligament medially to the edge of the scaphoid and the trapezium laterally. The nerve has flexor carpi radialis on its lateral side and palmaris longus on its medial side. So an incision on the medial side of the palmaris longus will not damage the nerve, nor will the incision then tether to the nerve after you stitched it. The light purple colored are the synovial sheath of the tendon, which if swollen can press the nerve as it passes through the rigid fibro-osseous carpal tunnel. This causes subjective sensory phenomenon in the sensory distribution of the median nerve. After passing through the tunnel, the nerve divides into the superficial and deep branches. The superficial branch supplies sensory to 3.5 radial digits and communicates with the superficial branch of the ulna. The deep branch passes between the abductor pollicis brevis and flexor pollicis brevis, pierces the opponent's pollicis and supplies the lumbricals 1 and 2. Rarely in carpal tunnel syndrome, there may be motor involvement also. In decompressing the median nerve, the carpal ligament needs to be totally divided from its proximal to the distal edge, but it is preferred to divide it medial to the palmaris longus tendon. The nerve can then be seen by lifting the radial edge of the ligament, lifting off the radial edge of the ligament. Then we see the anatomical basis of the claw hand. Now you notice that the deep branch of the median nerve passes between abductor pollicis brevis and flexor pollicis brevis, pierces the opponents and supplies lumbrical 1 and 2. The ulnar nerve passes between abductor digiti minimi and flexor digiti minimi, pierces the opponent's digiti minimi and supplies lumbrical 3-4. Additionally, it supplies all intraossei and ends in adductor pollicis. So, lumbricals which are arising from the flexor digitorum profundus go to the extensor expansion and tear to the MP joint, will flex the MP joint and extend the PIP and DIP joints by pulling at the extensor expansion. So when they become paralyzed, then the MP joint will be hyperextended and the PIP and DIP will be flexed. Now this is claw hand. The distal interphalangeal joint is flexed by the flexor digitorum profundus tendon. So in high ulnar or median paralysis, the flexor digitorum profundus of the first, second, and third and fourth fingers will be gone. And therefore, the flexion of the DIP will disappear and the deformity will be decreased. So this has been labeled as ulnar paradox, because higher paralysis should lead to more deformity, but here a higher paralysis is leading to lesser deformity or lesser claw hand deformity.